And I'm going to jump right in. My name is Chris, and I'm a consultant for SoftID. We work together on generative AI applications, in particular for job roles, business analysts, project managers, and folks like that. So today's topic is broken into two basic parts, and here's just a quick agenda for us. We're going to talk just a little bit, first 5 or 10 minutes here, about generative AI fundamentals, concepts that really are important to keep in the back of your mind. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the relationship between the underlying data environment and the AI models. We'll talk a little bit about some applied generative AI, and then in the second half, we'll spend that time on prompting and some introductions to prompt engineering. So let's get going. First, we want to hear from you. So if we don't mind, I've got a couple of poll questions here. And I believe we're going to administer these polls in the webinar, in the Zoom webinar here. So let me see here. I've got the poll loaded. Thank you, Laura. Let me see if I can get that deployed. Bear with me just one moment. Here we go. Okay, so this is our first poll. And if you can just take a moment to answer this, I'll leave it up for about 30 seconds. This is regarding how much exposure your organization has to generative AI initiatives. So we're curious to hear from you. What are you doing? Are any of your employers or organizations setting up or moving forward with initiatives related to generative AI, or really any kind of AI? And then you'll see there's a couple options here, which are what I might call adjacent to AI initiatives: agility, DevOps, predictive analytics, and data governance efforts, which are quite key to AI initiatives. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. I'm seeing lots of answers. Thank you for those. I'll leave the poll up for just one more moment here. Okay, so I can see right away that, all right, that's pretty much everybody, I think. Let's see if we can display these results. There we go. So quite a lot of people are working on generative AI initiatives. That's pretty exciting. 70%, just north of 70% on generative AI, a few on private LLMs, some other AI, and then some of these adjacent topics got quite a bit as well. So that's quite interesting. All right, so let's move on then to our next poll. Jumping around a little bit. Okay. So for our next poll, we want to hear from you about what your own personal experience is with generative AI. So this, I'm sure, will be a range, but we are just curious about how many folks in our audience have, gotten their feet wet with generative AI applications, or maybe you're actually using it in your job quite a bit. So I'll leave this one open again for a few seconds here. We've got some good answers coming in. Thank you for those. Looks like the majority of our respondents are falling sort of in the middle of the spectrum with a little bit of generative AI experience. We've got some regular experimentation and some without much exposure at all. So we still have some answers coming in. I'll leave that up for just one moment. Okay, looks like responses have stabilized here. Thank you for those responses. So responses are steady. We've got about half of our audience answering that they've got a little bit of generative AI experience via experimentation with a tool like ChatGPT. Great. So I'll share these results for just a moment. All right, awesome. And then we have one final poll question, which I'll administer, and we really do appreciate that engagement. It's very important to hear from you guys. So this final question is regarding policy associated with generative AI. So we want to see if, let's see here. Is this one work? Oh, the poll is launched. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. Generative AI policy. This poll might not be working. Okay, let's move on. All right, thanks for those results. It helps us to understand who we're dealing with and who the audience is here. So without any further ado, I'm going to move right on into the content here, and I'm going to be a bit brisk, and hopefully the pace will not be too fast. But I do hope that we will be speaking to you at a level that will be useful. I'm seeing a question in the chat about chat being disabled. It would be great. I agree to see if everyone could. Let's try this.
Yeah, Chris, I saw that too. If you are having an issue with chat, just put your question in the Q&A for now, and I'll be looking into that. I think I might have to reclaim the host in order to check any of the settings, but don't want to mess up your presentation, Chris.
Cool. Yeah, if you can work on that in the background, Laura, that'd be awesome. Because I certainly would love it if people have things they want to say. Okay, cool. So I'm going to continue presenting here. Let me reshare if I
Yeah, I'm
can.
gonna make you a co-host. Okay, I'm gonna check the settings.
Okay, cool. Let's continue here. So, generative AI. Quick introduction. It seems like most folks are a little bit aware of what this is, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But generative AI, in a nutshell, is it's tech that will produce net new content for you. So, the types of content are all over the place. ChatGPT and tools like Copilot or Bing Chat are the ones that most folks are familiar with. So, this is obviously a very sophisticated algorithm that uses what we call large language models to discern relationships across vast quantities of data. And the relationship discernment is such that by the time the models are tuned with many millions of parameters and recursively run through a neural network, it allows quite stunning logic to be applied in a way that can produce very human-like results with content generation. So content creation of one sort or another, net new, thus generative content, is the main purpose of these AI models. And just a word about the term AI. So in the last couple of years, since this big blow up around generative AI, you hear the term AI a lot, and people are usually referring to now generative AI or tools like ChatGPT when they're talking about this. But AI is in fact an umbrella term that we want to kind of keep an eye on as well, because there are other types of technologies associated with AI, and there's other types of AI as well besides just large language models or generative AI. For instance, algorithmic AI, and we're actually going to talk about that just in a moment. So today's webinar, of course, is focused on generative AI, but we want to keep track of some of these other technologies as well, because they can be very useful. Just a couple other points to consider. There are some concerns around the computing resources and the heat and the energy requirements required to run these models. It is very computing intensive. It certainly is. But the cool thing about it is that when balanced against the types of work that the AI can assist with, typically the resource utilization is going to be lower than if a concurrent human is doing that same type of work. And then finally, you may have heard about this aspect of the generative models known as hallucinations, when the reasoning behind the model sort of spins off into la la land and it can generate really weird stuff. So it's really interesting to me because it's one of the first examples I'm aware of in which a computing application can actually make mistakes in a way that humans can. Maybe not even quite the same way that humans do, but it's not just a glitch or a bug. It's really a weird mistake that the models make. And the models, they're getting better at this all the time, but they do make mistakes. So it's very important to keep a human in the loop. Human in the loop concept is an important AI concept just in general, but it's particularly important with the generative AI applications because they can make mistakes. All right. Now, I cannot go any further without talking just a little bit about the relationships between data. And there's a few different things that we want to think about here. Now, number one is the training data. And you can see here that the generative AI applications rely on vast quantities of training data sets. So in the case of ChatGPT, for instance, the initial ChatGPT that came out last year, this was trained on like essentially the entire internet, right? Like it wasn't necessarily everything on the internet, but it was a huge sweeping array of data, and it wasn't just the internet either. You'll engage with ChatGPT and see it's very knowledgeable about books and movies and historical sources and all kinds of things like that. So pretty interesting. But this was a huge data set. And they've been training the models and generating new data sets and training the updated models on those over the last year or so as well. So I'm not sure what we're up to in terms of how large the data sets are, but they were about maybe like half a terabyte in the beginning, and I think that those models are actually up to probably north of multiple terabytes. So that's huge, huge amount of training data. Um, Now, you can also customize these models with additional training data. So if you visit a tool like Midjourney or ChatGPT, these models are built out of the box to be very high performing generative AI tools. But if they sometimes are not that good at dealing with specific domain verticals or very contextual situations or situations where you really would need specialized domain expertise. And of course, for the most interesting applications of generative AI, you're going to need exactly that type of thing because, as we'll talk about in a moment, establishing context is so key. So you'll see that out there in the open source community and in some cases commercial community, they have these additional training tools called vectors. And so vectors are additional training data that can be incorporated into the base training data set to tune the model and optimize it for more specific applications. And there's all kinds of these vectors out there. And there's other ways to tune and optimize the models as well. We'll talk a little bit about those as well here in a second. So second, the data landscape that I want to talk about isn't really related directly to the training of the data model or the AI tool itself. It's really about data governance. So you noticed in the poll question, one of the questions was how many people have initiatives related to data governance. The data has to be very clean in order for these models to work well. And so this becomes relevant if you're in an organization that is attempting to implement like a private version of a tool like ChatGPT or private LLM, because those models are going to be trained on your own data, and that data, as we all know, often is all over the map. So you might have all kinds of different schemas, different types of formats, different databases here, there, everywhere. There may be no data at all, and these are all big hurdles to getting good performance out of an LLM. So the data has to be in a format that's good for ingestibility into the data model. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. You need well-structured data, or if it's unstructured data, there have to be some parameters around it that allow the machines to ingest the data. So training data, parameters, and data governance are the points that I wanted to make here. Now, there's one final point that I want to make about data. In a lot of ways, this image here is one that we've probably all seen. This is Gartner's hype cycle. So Gartner's hype cycle, which kind of is this idea of all the buzz that happens around a new technology, and then sort of this trough of disillusionment that he goes through as the initial buzz is a little bit overhyped. But then the adoption of the technology proves to be extremely useful. So the case that I want to make here is that with the last 18 months or so of generative AI and these large language models, it's not that I'm applying the hype cycle to generative AI itself. Where what I believe is that generative AI and large language models actually represents us reaching the plateau of productivity from the initial hype cycle that was around big data back in like 2011, 2012. So what we're actually realizing with the benefit of large language models are things that were kind of conceptually occurring to people when, you know, the Hadoop tool set was introduced in 2011 and things like that. But it was just really hard to engineer good solutions here. But with the large language models and the pre-trained transformers, which is the type of data model that underpins ChatGPT and models like that, what we're actually seeing here is now, you know, 12 years later, we are able to leverage this big data in a way that's truly useful. So pretty interesting, I think. Now, there are a few issues. There's some issues related to data, especially if you're going to use these models for the most interesting and the most useful applications. Now, the most useful and interesting applications aren't going to be based on training data or context that's just out of the box, you know, OpenAI, chatgpt.com, right? You're going to want to use this for your own organization's data. Now, there's some issues here with that because if you submit your data into just the normal public ChatGPT instance, you're essentially exposing that data to the internet. So your data is now on the internet. You know, OpenAI wants to use that to help train their next version of ChatGPT and things like that. And you're going to run into situations really quickly where that's probably just not okay. You know, you don't want to expose your commercial data to the internet, right? So what does that mean? What does that mean for us? It means that we need to be able to set up private instances of these large language models, and more people are doing this, right? Famous example a few weeks or a few months ago was from McKinsey. McKinsey was very quick to set up this internal large language model so that all of the folks actually who work for them have their own version of essentially ChatGPT, which is kind of trained on their own data and is also private. So the privacy concern is really important because to get the best, most useful competitive advantage out of a generative AI tool, you're gonna need to use your own company's data, and so you're gonna need your own LLM environment. Just a quick plug for NVIDIA here. NVIDIA has a framework called NeMo and an associated product called Guardrails, and that's probably the preeminent COTS product for implementing internal LLMs today. So check that out if you're interested. But it's something for sure that more and more companies are doing. All right. Now, I said a few minutes ago that I wanted to compare at least one other type of AI to generative AI, and we're going to refer to that as algorithmic AI. Now, algorithmic AI, the biggest difference between that and generative AI like ChatGPT is that it doesn't require these huge data sets, right? It can be computing intensive or maybe not. It just depends on the situation. But the algorithmic AI brings a whole separate set of application that's not necessarily offered by the generative AI. So on your screen here, you can see sort of the top level aspects of generative AI. Generative AI relies on the neural networks and the pre-trained transformer architecture to find these relationships across these vast language data sets and perform human-like reasoning in the abstract. It's very malleable, very fluid in its output. It can progressively learn, and we're going to see how to actually do that here in just a moment. But it's a very interesting application of deep learning neural networks, and primarily is used for creating and generating content, as we said. Now, algorithmic AI is also very important, right? Now, algorithmic AI is a type of model in which it's primarily the math that's going to perform the processing here. So this is a rules-based type of AI. This is the type of AI that we're maybe used to thinking about more in the context before the generative AI gold rush was happening a couple years ago. So if you think about like IBM's Deep Blue or Watson or things like that, those types of AI in their earliest incarnations, those did not rely on large language models. Those relied on algorithmic and still machine learning in the cases of those products I mentioned. But you know, if you have a data science expertise available to you in your organization, then this can be really powerful. Now, the really cool thing, and the reason that I really want to mention and highlight algorithmic versus generative AI is because the most interesting and powerful applications come when you start to use these things together, together with software architecture and things like that. So this is something that you want to experiment with if you have access to the people who can. When you start to combine the algorithmic AI with the generative models with the LLMs, you can start to realize some very powerful use cases. But algorithmic AI is a little different. And then, of course, neural networks and terms like that are they are subservient as well to the overarching umbrella term of AI. All right, so that's all I'll say about that. I want to spiff up a little slide of tools here, so I'm not going to go through these one by one, but I mentioned how many applications there are. Of course, you'll get the slides and the recording of the webinar, but you should check these out. Some of these are just incredibly powerful, and there's more coming out all the time. But these are some of our favorites here at SoftEd. So these are essentially applying the LLM generative AI power to more specialized use cases, right? So you can use these models for generating video, for duplicating voice, for inputting scripts into a tool and having it output very human sounding language. You can do it for image generation. One particularly interesting use case that I've been playing with here lately is that Microsoft Copilot, which is essentially the same type of model as ChatGPT. Of course, Microsoft has a partnership with OpenAI. And so ChatGPT's technology is now like baked into tons of Microsoft products, including enterprise management programs like Dynamics 365 and things like that. So if you're a project manager or business analyst or something like that, and you are using Microsoft D365, you have all the benefits of ChatGPT baked in on board within the system, project operations, or whatever D365 application that you're using. So you can check these out. These are pretty cool, but different ones are better for different use cases. So like, for instance, Perplexity, we like that one because the sourcing is more reliable, citation and sources, instead of sometimes the other models can be pretty unreliable. So if you're doing a research article or publishing content that's going to be out in the public, sometimes errors can slip through in terms of things that aren't cited, because the models will just make stuff up and present them as if it's real, right? Okay, so that is my super fast crash course on fundamentals of generative AI. I'm going to stop there for just a minute and check the chat. And if we have any interesting questions or talking points, maybe we will discuss them for a second. Cool. I see Adam's comments here. Adam, you make some really great points here. I actually want to talk about these for just a moment, right? So the legal aspect. Now we have a completely discrete webinar coming up later, which deals just with these legality issues, right? But it's a really good issue, and I think unfortunately there are really no firm precedents yet. It's kind of the Wild West out there these days. There are lawsuits flying around, but no matter where you land on this, you cannot deny that these generative AI companies are getting a lot of value, and they're producing a lot of value based on essentially scraping everybody's content and then using that to build these products. And a lot of that content is, it's copyrighted content, it's people's IP, it's people's livelihoods. These are very top of mind questions related to the topic, and it remains to be seen what the legal precedents are going to be. So I think, in terms of a pragmatic takeaway, the only one that you can really take away is to err on the side of caution. Maybe don't publish and commercialize your content. Use the tools for sure, but before you just kind of turn and burn on putting something out there, you have to be careful. Right now, in the software industry, it's interesting as well, because of course GitHub is now using Copilot for coding and for IDEs. Now, this is very powerful, because if you think that generative AI is good at using language relationships and kind of discussing things with you in English or whatever your preferred language is. We wait and see how well the machine models are at generating code and applications. So very powerful. So the potential there is just huge. But if you use Copilot in GitHub to generate your own code or to build your own products, I do believe that there are T's and C's there that specify that code belongs essentially to Microsoft. Another example is Midjourney, one of the coolest image generators out there. It's one that I use a lot and have used for the images in this very presentation, as a matter of fact. But any images that are produced using that tool are public domain images, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't use them commercially, but it does mean that you don't own them. So if you use them commercially and you put that content out there in the world, somebody else can come along and scrape that content and use that just like you can, and you don't have any legal basis to lay claim to that IP. So there's a lot of issues here, right? Adam makes one other point that algorithmic and rules-based AI much easier to define and describe with transparency. Very true. Of course, AI has an issue which is known as the black box problem. This can be true of not just generative AI, although it's certainly an issue. But the black box problem is a situation in which the level of computation, and this is particularly true with things like neural networks and deep learning and things like that, because the algorithms get so recursive that as they build upon themselves layer after layer and they perform more and more processing, by the time you're a few layers deep, it's just essentially impossible to tell what's going on. So that's a problem for compliance and auditability and things like that, because if you are subject to compliance rules, that means your IT processes and controls have to be traceable. The traceability can get difficult. So the black box problem is something that is a clear and present issue as well. Also is when things go wrong, or if the algorithm or if the model behaves in a way that's unpredictable, it can be hard to troubleshoot because you just don't always know what's going on there. So Adam, thanks for those comments. Great points for sure. Oh, Michael is in the audience. Michael, good to see you. But it will be interesting to see the results of those lawsuits. All right. So with that, let's get into a slightly more application-based section of the program, and that's going to be about our prompt engineering here, right? So now prompt engineering, probably one of the fastest buzzwords that I ever saw rise to the top of the list. But as I've been doing research here, I find it really is, it's like pretty legit. So let's take a look at some things here. Now I'm going to pretend for a moment like we don't really have much experience at all with prompt engineering, but we're going to get rapidly into some things that are, I'd say, like more intermediate use cases. And I've got some cool things I'm going to show you that I hope you'll enjoy and get some value out of. So prompting basics first and foremost. These 6 guidelines are directly from OpenAI. So OpenAI gives you these fundamentals right out of the gate to think about when you're putting your prompting together, right? And so I don't have to read these off to you, but this is great guidance, and even just following these basic guidelines will get a lot more useful and a lot more valuable output out of the AI application. So I think in a nutshell, the thing to understand is that context is really everything when it comes to prompting the model. So the more you can give it examples, the more you can give it feedback. Also stick with it and continue giving the model feedback. So some of the best output is going to come after there's been quite a long thread of dialogue with the chatbot. Because it will learn from each one of your responses. If you use ChatGPT, you'll see it's got a little thumbs up, thumbs down feedback mechanism there for you. So even just that type of basic like NPS type feedback is useful, but you can get really specific and really detailed with your feedback as well. And the models respond really well to that kind of thing. So you can also sort of preload the model with certain frames that will give you more relevant feedback as well. So like asking it to adopt a persona. And this is something that I use in one of the examples that I'll show here shortly. Also, it's useful to try to decompose and break things down a little bit. So instead of giving some kind of really high level prompt, you can sort of like break it down a little bit, break it into a series of steps, make it a little bit more discreet and easier to understand. And I've got some great examples for this here for you in a second. All right, so these are the prompting basics. You can check these out on OpenAI. They've got a great community forum over there, and there's a lot of great information, right? So these are some examples. These are some examples of prompts that are not very good. So, and again, I won't read these through one by one, but you can see that these are just, these are prompts that it might be, there might be prompts that you would put in if you didn't really think about crafting your prompts a little bit more thoughtfully. But you can see they're very big questions. They're vague. There's not a lot of specificity. There's nothing there for the model to glom onto and sort of establish context. So that's the biggest problem with prompts like this, is they're just too big, too open-ended, too vague, too high level, right? So remember, you got to remember you're dealing with a machine. Machines need specifics. They need examples, they need feedback, and things like that. So let's look at this a new version of these same prompts, but done in a good way, right? So again, you can read these for yourselves, but the overarching theme here is that there's just a lot more specificity and there's a lot more detail and there's a lot more structure given to what you're asking the AI to produce. So, and the reality is the best way to learn about good prompting is just to practice it. And you can learn from the model as well. So, head on over to ChatGPT, and even if it's the free version, 3.5, and experiment with this. And you can have a conversation with ChatGPT about what good prompting looks like, and you can get ChatGPT to write your prompts for you if you have a specific business question or use case that you're trying to deal with, right? So these examples, you can see like you're giving it a good frame, you're being specific, giving it numerical guidance on how many items it should produce, helping it with format and length and things like that, right? So good prompts, bad prompts. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is this concept of chained prompts. So chain prompts are really just multiple prompts that are done in a series in order to achieve one particular objective. And there's a few different ways to do this. So this is a really important technique, and it can be very basic. It can just be conversational. Hey, I need some ideas for the best family-friendly streaming movies for my 9-year-old this weekend. Yeah, okay, yeah, like that's a good list. We've already seen all those. Can you give me some other suggestions? That would be the second one. Well, my 9-year-old is really into unicorns and spaceships. Can we narrow that down, right? So that's really basic. It's just conversational. But even that type of thing narrows down the result, and this can get quite sophisticated if you get good at it, right? So, but this allows you to progressively elaborate your context. And it's really all about the context and the feedback. So context and feedback, I know I say it a lot of times, but you really can't say it enough, because context and feedback are the main things. Now, there's one other point I want to make too, which is actually not on this slide. You have to remember that the generative AI applications are running using these large language models. So I haven't talked a lot about the actual technical architecture of the language models. But if you're a nerd like me, it's really quite interesting. So you should check out the pre-trained transformer architecture. It's very interesting, and but what it allows the model to do is ascertain, as I said at the top, ascertain these relationships between across the language. But the thing to remember is that it is language that is being used to essentially define all of the operational logic of the machine model. So why do I say that? I say that because what that means is the better your own language skills are, the better you're going to be at prompting. And I think that that's a really important point. So, if you think about sort of the dialectic, or, using rigor in your language, or if anybody ever took any, debate classes or philosophy classes or something like that, disciplines in which it's very important to have rigor around your language, so that you don't get ambiguous about your meanings, or you don't go down rabbit holes and start, like, if you're in a dialogue with somebody, you don't get misaligned on your premises and things like that. That stuff is really valuable when you interact with these models. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I think that's one of the most valuable lessons I've learned for myself, is that if you are a good linguist, or even a good public speaker, think about the way that you would communicate with a person, and endeavor to communicate in that same way with the model. And the better you are at that, the better the model will be, because it's receiving better prompting from you. So it's really cool, actually, because it's very, I guess you could say it's like a humanity based. And when I say humanity, the way that, like, a college subject like English or the arts, these are humanities subjects. And the better you are at that type of thing, the better you're going to be at using these models. So that's pretty exciting, because all of a sudden it's not just engineers or developers or coders who have the opportunity to get really good at this usage. People who are more used to dealing in the abstract, all of a sudden have an opportunity to gain great technical value using the output of the model, but just based on the language skills that you already have. So that's just a point that I wanted to make. All right, so chaining prompts together. I've got some examples here, and I want to show you these examples because I think that they are pretty cool. Before I continue, let's check the chat again. Got some input here. Steve asked, "What about tone? Does it matter if your prompts are polite?" Not really. I will say this, and if you've used ChatGPT, you've probably found this to be true very quickly. Um, the models, in particular ChatGPT out of the box, they are very polite. In fact, they're so polite that it can get a little bit annoying. And this is that's exactly right, Adam, right? Like, you're not going to hurt the AI's feelings. Now, I like to be polite, but it's not because I'm trying to be considerate of the AI. It's just because I think it's good personal practice, right? Like, if you're going to have a dialectic with someone, whether it's a machine or not, just practice being polite, be nice. But does it matter to the prompting? Nope, not at all. You can order the model around or be abrupt or whatever. But back to this issue of the model being very pedantic, and it's going to be very, it's there to please you, right? So I'm like, that's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, because if you think about the logic that powers the models are there, not necessarily to give a correct answer. It's going to give the answer that it thinks is going to please you. So most of the time that overlaps with correctness, but not always. So they will just blatantly lie to you if they think that maybe that's the answer that you want to hear. There's also a reliability issue there too, right? Because we need our research, our output to be correct first and foremost, or at least that's my opinion, for the type of work that I use these tools for. And so sometimes you have to tell the model, you need to make sure that you are thinking critically about this, exercise some skepticism. I'm always telling the models things like that right away, but you'll find the models to be very they're like very like fawning to you, and it can be a little bit annoying, but it's not just the annoying tone of it. It's the fact that you need the output to be reliable. So one example that I think is pretty cool is you can ask the model to adopt a persona of like a tough customer. Tell the model, play the role of a customer in my product space who has very limited budget and they're a really tough customer. And now we're going to role play an interview to see if I can make the sale. and that works really well. But you just have to tell it to do that out of the box. It's very overly polite. Um, and you can tell the models to adopt any type of tone you want. But in terms of performance, nope, not gonna matter too much to the model. Okay, so I'm actually gonna pause my screen and let's actually get a little bit live with this. And I'm actually gonna go over now to my ChatGPT window and the chain of prompts. I prepared a chain of prompts for you guys, which was designed to actually produce some useful resources that we could use. Say if we're in the role of an agile project manager. So I'm going to share my live ChatGPT space with you. I'm using ChatGPT 4, and the prompts that I just shared with you on the screen are the ones that I'm going to use here. All right, let me find my spot here. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. All right, so this is the first prompt, and this is on the slide. So if you want to try something like this, and you can adapt these to your own use case, whatever it is. All right, as an agile project manager, can you assist me? Oh, sorry, jumping the gun. First, the point of this chain of prompts is to achieve a task in which we use ChatGPT to help us identify automation use cases, right? So in other words, we're asking ChatGPT to help us evaluate our work environment or our project environment in a way that can help us spot the lowest hanging fruit to automate things using generative AI. So the whole point of this is, how can we use generative AI? Where can we use it? Where can we get the most bang for the buck? And so if I have time, and I may not, but I've got a couple slides at the end that just talks about automation principles in general. I think it's important to think about those. And if we don't have time to get to those, then they'll still be in the slide deck and you can think about those. But so what I've done here is I preloaded some automation criteria, and this has nothing to do with AI. It's just general automation criteria. So in general, attributes of work which lend themselves well to automation, right? So it's repetitive, it's boring, it has to do with data or machine to machine interfacing, things like that. Like those things are really good to automate. People aren't as good as those things as machines are. So now we're going to bring this and we're going to start to stack some contextual dimensions into our prompting, which is going to coax ChatGPT to produce some resources for us, right? So first off, we want a framework to identify effective use cases for ChatGPT, right? Simple. We're just asking it, what can we automate? I'm an agile project manager. Help me understand what I can automate. So, and it then spits this stuff out. This is pretty good output, processes, use cases, tool assessment. This is the type of output that it's going to give based on your job role. And then, of course, ever there to please, it's going to tell you that what a good idea it is and how well it can help you, right? So here's the second prompt then, right? So the second prompt stacks a new dimension into the prompt, which is going to say, okay, we want to take everything that you just said, and we want to now break out by role, by specific role. So that I'm an agile project manager. I'm working on an agile team. What are the typical roles on an agile team? Now take the automation use case criteria that you just generated and now further refine it by the roles on an agile team. And this works pretty well. So it, of course, is all too eager to please and immediately generates some automation use case candidates for these roles: product owner, scrum master, developers, QA folks, BAs, UX folks, PMs, and coaches. And this is pretty good, at least as a place to start. Now, again, the content is rarely, if ever, going to be like the end all be all. It's just ready to use, but it's a great place to start. So these are things that these roles do every day, and so we're starting to get some ideas from ChatGPT about where automation use cases might apply well. All right. Okay, so then our third prompt is, okay, we want to use this logic to actually create a tool that an agile project manager can use, right? So So we want to build a checklist. So let's use the output that we've gotten from the first two prompts refined by roles to help us generate a checklist which is targeted to those roles. And then the person working in that role can take that checklist and they can go sort of assess their work and canvas their work environment to see if there are good opportunities to automate with generative AI. And now this is starting to get pretty good, right? So, these are obviously the types of things that, and we're doing this role by role too. That's important, by the way, because you'll overload ChatGPT if you ask it to do all those roles at once. So once you've established like what that list of roles are and kind of what the logical framework is for identifying the automation use cases, now we're going to say, okay, just starting with the first role only, product owner, can you generate this checklist, right? So it generates this checklist. Some of these are better than others. Gather market insights, I don't know, maybe so. But I think things like feature ideation, communication for sure. Some of the stuff that gets really boring, managing the meeting, communication, and the updates and things like that. So, it says it's a comprehensive guide. Is it a comprehensive guide? I'm not sure it is, but it's still useful to see how it works, and it starts getting useful. Then, okay. And then finally, I believe this is the last prompt before we go to the next role, format the content into a table, right? So that this is the content that comes out. And I've played with things like asking it to score the automation criteria 1 through 5, 1 through 10. That I think can be pretty interesting because then, it's not that you're ready to automate right the very next minute, but it is going to give you a place to start, right? And then so what we end up with then, of course, is something that looks a little bit like this. Okay, so this looks pretty nice, right? And this is something we can use as a starter resource to start identifying our automation use cases. So that's the first prompt chain example. And now I've got another example here that I want to share. Okay. Now this is a prompt that I pulled from the OpenAI developer community. And bear with me while I get this back sharing. Okay. So you can find this is an interesting prompt. You can see it's been written in kind of a markdown language here. But a prompt like this has kind of built in very rigorous logic step by step in order to do task definition. Or you provide the task definition, and then it would kind of decompose the thing into steps. And putting the prompt in a markdown format like this is be pretty useful for technical applications as well, right? So you can almost use it as a coding assistant if you're trying to develop new application code or something like this. But it can be used for anything. So I've got an example of this that sorry about that. I've got an example of this that I cooked up here in another window, and I will show you how that worked. All right, so we're going to go back over to ChatGPT here. Just have to find it. One moment. Okay, let's try it live. All right, so this prompt, I'm not gonna like detail it specifically. It's a little bit odd the way it says these parameters and directives, but the thing to understand about these parameters and directives is that this is it's almost like a prompt to get to a prompt. So we're gonna use this prompt to play with a scenario that I've been messing with a little bit here, which is a new ERP implementation. So let's say that we're a project manager and we want to, we're in the middle of a new SAP implementation. So we would tell ChatGPT to use this prompt structure. And I'm doing this live because I have my examples buried somewhere. We load this prompt logic, and then this is going to run in the background. So this will take a minute. So I'm gonna continue on, and then we'll come back to this to see what it comes back with. Also, I find that whenever I'm doing live demo, that's of course the time when ChatGPT will crash or something like that. So we'll have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Um, all right, so let me go back to my slides here real quick, and I'm gonna go to my next example while this cooks. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to share, which I think is pretty interesting, is this thing called MedPrompt. MedPrompt is a really cool example of how to use prompt engineering to get the most out of the generative AI model. Now, what MedPrompt is MedPrompt is something that runs in the background, and it was developed by Microsoft. And the thing to understand about MedPrompt is in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned how you can tune the model with the vectors and like establish context and things like that. So when you do that, it allows the model to better respond to contextually specific questions and things like that, right? So there's additional training data sets and things like that. Those are the vectors that I was talking about. But the MedPrompt study that Microsoft did is very interesting because what they found was that with the right prompting, you could get actually superior performance out of the model just with a good prompt engineering, but using the out-of-the-box model than you did with these attuned, customized models, right? So what you see here is basically the kind of the orange one here in this like in the middle, which didn't really perform too great on all of these question batteries, which are designed to like assess how well can the machine perform in its answering, especially compared to humans. So without any tuning at all, you can see it did pretty bad. Then in kind of the purple here, this is a 5-shot scenario. So 5-shot means you gave the model 5 examples. And then the pink one here is MedPrompt. MedPrompt used 3 different prompting principles to create very robust logical framework that runs in the background. And then I'm going to explain kind of what those things were. So the way MedPrompt works is that it uses 3 tools to kind of establish a prompting framework that then you can go in and ask these medically specific, like healthcare related questions and things like that. So it uses techniques called dynamic few shot examples, and here's the explanation of what that is. Just gives it a few examples to learn from, so it does a little bit of learning in advance. Then it uses this technique called auto-generated chain of thought. Now that's a really fancy term, but all it means is just breaking down or telling the model to break down its logic into steps and show its work. So just like you might do a long division problem or something like that, if you force the model to show its work, it's almost like it also forces the model to evaluate the validity of that work. And then the output is much more reliable because it's forced the model to kind of be almost like self-aware of what the process is. So it doesn't just like riff and vamp and make stuff up. And then finally, choice shuffle ensembling, another fancy sounding term. But what this basically is it's essentially like it tells the model to run iterations of the question and then shuffle those answers up and see which one sees the most correct. So it's almost like a mini Monte Carlo analysis. I don't know if that's actually a technically accurate comparison, but it seems like there's an analogy there to me. But when you generate multiple sets of output and then you randomly shuffle those up, and then you kind of, it kind of allows it to like almost vote on the answer. So then you can squeeze a few percentage points more accuracy out of it as well. So that's what MedPrompt is. And MedPrompt's pretty cool. You should check it out. But MedPrompt, the cool point about MedPrompt is that it demonstrates that even though a lot of the buzz and excitement is around new models, new updates, things like that, um, there's still a lot of potential left in just the out of the box models, right? So we can approximate these techniques. We cannot load those prompt engineering frameworks in the background like Microsoft can, but we can approximate these techniques with some of these prompting examples, right? So this is again my ERP implementation project example. And these are examples of how you might apply those techniques in the prompt. It's not really quite the real deal, but it's similar, right? And you can apply the same logic in terms of giving it a few shot learning examples, telling it to show its work. So in other words, if you tell the model include considerations for this thing, and that thing, it forces it to break it down, and then the logic's going to be more robust. And then you can iterate on that as well. And this is just the same progressive elaboration concept that we talked about. So, and then these last two are relatively, I think, similar to what we've already discussed. So, so just check out MedPrompt. It's a really cool little case study of how you can approximate these few shot examples, chain of thought, and choice shuffle ensembling is the term there. All right, let's go back real quick to our example. It's running in the background. We are almost out of time, so I'm going to try to be brief because there's one other thing I want to try to show you real quick. All right, so here we have our structured prompt that we pulled from the OpenAI community here, and we gave it this ERP example, right? So this is the output you can see. So it's adjusted our SAP implementation example, and it's given us all this output. Now, each one of these, the cool thing here is that each one of these could be used as a prompt in itself to get more granular about the specific SAP implementation project. So, good project manager, some of this stuff is just going to seem like common sense, but some of it is going to be insightful. And that's the whole point of a nice structured prompt like this, is to make it nice and insightful. So try these out. You can have a field day with prompts like this, and you can approximate some very robust prompt engineering logic with some of these things as well. All right, I'm gonna do a time check here. We're just about out of time. You'll see in the chat, Laura is advertising some of our additional topics coming up here. And then I'm going to see if I can squeeze in one other thing real quick here, which is this integration between Gemini and Google Sheets. And I'm just going to show you this real quick. So with Gemini, Google Sheets has integrated the generative AI logic into the Sheets. If you go to your Sheets, you'll see this app script right here. If you open up the app script extension there, you'll get a little studio space like this. And you can see that there's a little script here, 37 lines long. And what it does is it allows the sheet to make a BARD call. Now this is loading right here, but here's the BARD logic. Let me blow this up so you can see it a little bit. So it calls BARD, or Gemini, or still called BARD in the API. And then it allows you to put variable content in here, new ERP software implementation. And then this is a prompt. In this one, BARD will call that prompt. It puts the variable content in there. And then you're going to get content that's dynamic based on what the variable is. And then this goes over, and you can chain together lots and lots of content like this, and it's really cool. In the slides, because I'm out of time, so I haven't gotten to this for you folks today. But in the slides here, I explain how to do this. This is the little script that you use, and this is the instruction for the Gemini API key that you'll use to do this. All right. So that brings us to 2:01. I'm actually 1 minute over, but I appreciate you sticking with me. I told you I had a lot. I might not get to everything. I didn't get to my automation concepts, but they will be in the slides. It's common sense. You can take a lot. Adam, really appreciate the engagement. Michael, the comments. Laura, thanks for your help. I really do appreciate it. And I look forward. We'll be doing a series of these. So join us for these. We really enjoy hearing from you, and we really enjoy sharing our explanation of topics like this. All right. So thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to hang around in the background for like 5 minutes. If anybody has any Q&A, I'm happy to hang on. But otherwise, I'll let you go. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.